Today I'm taking a look at the character of Zell Dincht, who, unlike the previously discussed protagonists of Squall and Quistis, proves an extroverted upstart who, through the game story, proves a mildly provocative but intensely loyal comrade to the central party. Now, following on from Quistis, Zell is the next party member that we officially obtain, and much to Squall's disdain, he's allocated to us for the seed exam, along with Seifer as the captain. And regarding Zell, it's interesting to note how, among in-game characters and Final Fantasy players alike, he has the capacity to rub people the wrong way with his incessant optimism and natural impulsiveness. And from the very outset of the seed exam, we see both Squall and Seifer tiring of his running commentary and emotional response to things. And on this note, one thing I really like, and I haven't really commented on before regarding Final Fantasy VIII, is that each character has a set of predefined movements that conveys their emotions during dialogue segments. For example, Squall has a recurring facepalm when people say or do stupid things, and Selphie has her jump for joy movement. But regarding Zell, he has a recurring motion of stamping his foot and shaking his fists in indignance, which, although limited by the standards of 1999, it's a great visual cue and communicative of this character's demeanour, which we find quickly is someone easy to provoke and, get physical in his response to things. Indeed, as I've noted before in my long-form Final Fantasy VIII review, Zell is someone who has all the apparent credentials of an extroverted bruiser. His physical response, his quickness to anger, and even his flamboyant facial tattoo all signify someone with confidence, self-assurance, and the capacity for violence. And as someone has previously suggested in the comments of another episode, Japanese tropes in anime and games often extend to the hair colour of certain characters, and blonde males are often depicted as tricksters, extroverts, or upstarts, which I think we could certainly see in the character of Zell, Prompto, Zidane, and a few others within the Final Fantasy franchise. However, beyond this, what I've always enjoyed about Zell is that, despite appearances, he is actually a much more sensitive and emotive and, intelligent character, than we initially might think. And these aspects of his character shine through at certain intervals throughout the game story. For example, for all his blustering over his feud with Seifer, after Seifer's presumed execution, Zell actually states that he considers Seifer as one of them, and he wants the opportunity to avenge him if he can. And likewise, when Edea returns back to normal and decides to venture to Esthar, Zell chooses to escort her to ensure her safety. And much like Seifer and later Squall, Zell seems to covet Rinoa's affections as well, and seeks to make a gift of Squall's ring to her. And all of these, aspects of him in the story seem to indicate a more compassionate side that he often tries to hide. Going back to the comments I made in my Quistis episode, the main party, the orphans, each seem to have a facade that they hide behind, and this conceals their true character and their deeper insecurities. And for Zell's part, he acts like the tough guy in an effort to hide this sensitivity. And it's interesting that Seifer, who's known him since childhood, calls him chicken all the time, which shows that Seifer seems to remember this childhood Zell, who's ostensibly, a good boy. He follows the rules, and, for example, he doesn't indulge in letting off fireworks with the others. And I think this speaks volumes about why Zell grew up to develop this tough guy facade, get a facial tattoo and develop proficiencies in the martial arts, because it was a means of, escape and to make up for these insecurities that he has. Zell's desire to be a tough guy could also extend in part from his adoptive grandfather, and if Zell's in our party during the Balam Town occupation, we have the opportunity to visit his bedroom and gain a little more context and insight into this aspect of his character. And here we learn that Zell considers his bedroom as sacred, and it's essentially a shrine to his grandfather, who's described as a warrior and, a great soldier. And owing to the fact that Zell doesn't learn he's adopted until much later on, this nurturing he has. He kind of clearly has this reverence, and comes from a caring and nuclear family. So it makes sense that this perceived relative would enamour him and inform his pursuits in life. Once again, however, the fact that Zell erects a shrine to remember his grandfather also communicates this compassionate and sensitive side of his character as well. Now, beyond these examples of Zell being a nice guy, another thing I find amusing in his character, which I didn't pick up on until a couple of years ago when someone suggested it to me, is how he seems to yearn for approval from Squall, and he seems to really seek and perceive a blossoming bromance that doesn't necessarily exist. The example that was pointed out to me at the time is when Squall and Seifer start discussing their desire for combat during the Dole mission, and Zell's kind of stood there in the background, really surprised, like, wait, you're all buddy-buddy now, which seems to have a hint of forlonging about it. And perhaps he's feeling slightly ostracised, because the only thing that him and Squall have in common at this point is that neither of them particularly like Seifer. Another example is during the D-District prison scenario, when Squall appears in a moment of deus ex machina to save Zell, and Zell's response is to grab Squall and kind of revel in the broness of this moment. And again, it's a mildly amusing incident, and ever since this was suggested to me, that Zell harbours this friendship from Squall, I can't really unsee it at certain points of the game. And I think another prime example of this is how Zell pipes up at several intervals, such as the Deep Sea Research Facility, and he says, I kind of know what this place is. Do you want to hear my story? Do you want me to explain it? And we can either say yes or no at these certain game moments. And if we say yes, he's obviously very pleased with himself. And, again, this leans towards his understated intelligence, but it also shows perhaps his efforts to impress Squall, who, he seems to really, really like. On a final note of Zell's penchant for comic relief and amusing secondary storylines, I love how he's oblivious to the affections of the library girl, and through a subtle side quest we can encourage her to share her feelings with Zell. And regardless of whether the side quest is completed or not, the ending FMV shows him to be a somewhat awful boyfriend, because we have this poor library girl sat neglected while Zell is shoveling his face full of hot dogs. So again, another great, moment of comic relief from Zell there. So, wrapping up on him, this has been quite brief, but as I've stated, he's a slightly divisive character, because many found his unrestrained, effusive manner quite frustrating. And even in game events, despite his book smarts and knowledge, his lack of common sense and quickness to anger results in episodes like Vinza de Ling discovering that they're all from Garden during the botched timber mission. But despite this, I think it's prudent to note that we are dealing with 17-year-olds, and Zell develops much more pragmatism and maturity as the story wears on, which is a subtle character arc, I think, that complements, and albeit it does sit in the background of Squall's story, because of course Squall and Rinoa, and to a lesser extent Laguna, are the focal point of the FF8 story. But I've personally always enjoyed Zell, because his attributes, while impassioned, are essentially, a fierce loyalty to his friends and Garden, and although Squall overlooks him early on, he remains steadfast among his friends, which, I really quite like. So, what are your thoughts on Zell? Drop a comment, start a conversation, and if you enjoyed the episode, please like and subscribe to keep updated with my latest posts.